Every entrepreneur has been there. Growing pains,
Obstacles make
to
you
growth
stronger.
gains.
It's the challenges that cause us to level up.
I'm your host, Alicia Domenico.
Maybe you want to stoke the fire a little bit. Sometimes like to be controversial. Sometimes I like to pick on bad actors because there's a few in my space, which my partner does not like me doing, but I feel it's important.
So you're increasing revenue. At the same time, your company wants to make those gains profitable as quickly as possible with the fewest expenses. And that means you want to use all the free tools and services you can. It's natural that you look at organic social media and think, hey, this could totally work for us. But how much can you rely on social media to help your company grow before the expense of your time invested in the project surpasses the value of the experiment? I think the dream of organic social media is that you look at these free tools and you think, oh, I could just make these quick little posts and make it rain leads. Yes, I want that. But it rarely works out. Why is that? And how can you get closer to the goal of social media actually working for you? Let's dig into it in this episode. When you don't have a lot riding on the line, you can do whatever you want with your time. So why not experiment? Why not play? Why not do whatever you want to do on social media and see if it works or what actually even happens if you do it? You can start it as a hobby. We're not talking about a hobby here in this episode. We're going to talk about if you're a business and the value of social media, because time is always a factor when you're in business and you don't always have the time to waste on these experiments. The cost of a person's time when they're just starting out is rarely accounted for. And I think this is a normal point of growth. Initially, you're starting out, you don't have anything but time to give something, and so you have to work hard to make it better, and you do what's necessary in order to do that. But as a business grows and gets busier, it gets more and more important to justify the time you and your team spend on social media. Some key questions you're going to want to ask as you're trying to grow your company and think, okay, what are we doing with social media here? Is how will you know if the experiment is valuable? And here are some factors you can think about. 1, the cost of time. How much time is being spent on the effort? And who's doing that work in terms of what's the hourly rate of that time. Another metric of time is how long will you do this experiment before moving on to something else? So in other words, how much time can you afford to spend on all organic social media? But the third and most critical factor is what software are you going to use to track efficacy? Now this piece about efficacy needs some drilling down. So we'll get in some education here about what organic social media really can do. Most companies will say, oh, we need to create awareness. The synonym for awareness in a digital world is actually traffic. You need to generate traffic to your website, which is your online space, your online bricks and mortar version of you, so that people can really get to know you and understand your brand and what it is you're selling and how you differentiate yourself in the market. I think it's really important to explain that there are 3 different buckets around traffic, and everybody from your marketing team to your sales team has a role in these buckets. There's 2 buckets that the marketing team is responsible for. 1 is the organic traffic driving bucket. Things like posts on LinkedIn, Facebook, X. Yes, I called it X. Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. All of those things are organic, big social media traffic drivers. And of course, a big part of that is search engine optimization. And so there are organic traffic driving efforts you do for search engine optimization. YouTube is one of them, as is your actual SEO efforts that you do on your website and your blogs. It also includes the emailing that you can be doing to the people that are in your CRM that you have permission to email. These are all things that you can do relatively for free in the sense that all you have is the cost of your time and likely the software that you need in order to do it in an effective way to track the efficacy of this organic traffic driving effort. That's the marketing team's role, and it's really important for making sure that you're going to have long-term success, because the second bucket that they manage, the paid media traffic drivers, is really good in the short term, but it's expensive, so it's not great in the long term. So that's why you want to have these organic traffic driving efforts that are layered in behind, and you're not just 100% dependent on paid advertising. Okay, so in the second bucket of the marketing team of paid media traffic drivers, we have things like Google Ads. So these are paid search ads that you can do. You can also do paid YouTube ads. You can do paid ads on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and X. as well as a host of all other places. But those are the big ones, because once you get into things like digital mobile games and apps, then you need a lot of other software and a bigger effort around your paid media. Typically, most companies don't foray into that until they really have a reliable pay-per-click and digital advertising team behind them to support that structure. I also recommend caution getting into paid media traffic drivers, because paid media is like the fire hose version of driving traffic. And this is just a traffic effort. It's not actually a lead generation. It's just the start of the funnel to get to lead generation, which we're going to talk about in a second. But that concept of if you're going to fire hose this thing and spend money on every ad, you kind of want to know what works before you up the ante and start spending more money on it. Okay, and the third bucket, which is the responsibility of the sales team, are your organic sales traffic drivers. So your sales team is going to trade shows, they're picking up the phone and calling people, they're emailing people, they're working on LinkedIn using Sales Navigator, and they're hosting meetings. All of these things are what we call like getting out there and hitting the pavement, beating the street. Those are the kinds of things that you do as the sales team to drive traffic essentially to your brand, create awareness, and try to start a relationship or get what we call a conversion, which is the second phase of marketing after you've got sufficient traffic. And you never really want to be doing these traffic efforts in isolation. You need to know that you're going to have this second growth lever that you can pull on after traffic, which is a conversion point. In the marketing world, these conversion points, the second lever of growth after traffic, are things like form fills. A landing page with a form fill is a classic example of a conversion point. Of course, booking a meeting with somebody is also a classic example of a conversion point where you have a chance to have a conversation. In the digital world, having somebody fill in a form off of a landing page, coming to a webinar, in the good old 2017 days, maybe downloading a white paper, those are all places that you can start to nurture the relationship. Of course, now that digital marketing is a lot more locked down in terms of who you can email, we are seeing that email nurturing kind of be resided to high value relationships with people in your CRM who know you and definitely want and need to hear from you in email format. But all of this to say, these two levers that you have to pull on, one being traffic, two being a conversion point, you never want to hit on organic traffic drivers unless you know what your conversion path looks like after that. And keep in mind, the conversion point is rarely book a demo. It's rarely like straight to, I want to get on a path to purchase. And if people are jumping straight on that path to purchase, they're often not great leads who don't convert into a closed won deal later on and become customers. So when we talk about getting into the world of organic traffic driving, we really need to understand the longer tail of this effort and how it's going to affect the company downstream in terms of closed revenue. And just to close the loop on the third lever that your marketing team can push on for growth is remarketing and nurturing. And there's lots of different forms that can take. I'm not going to get into it on this show, but I want you to understand that there are still only three levers of growth that a marketing team can push on. One, traffic. Two, a conversion strategy. And three, your remarketing or nurturing. But marketing can never close deals. Only the sales team and the customer success retention team can close revenue. So that means that your marketing team is already sitting away from revenue because their traffic driving efforts are not going to close deals on their own. This creates a bit of a tailspin for most organizations because you know social media is important anecdotally, but you're having a hard time connecting the effort to revenue. And the reason why I took the time to explain all of this is that yes, you can have software in place and it is actually mission critical to have software in place, but understanding, is it working? How long should we do this for? Is it actually helping us? Is hard, if not impossible, if the process to how this effort could contribute to revenue is unclear. So what we recommend is understand this process, what I just took you through in terms of this. First, it's the organic traffic driver. Then it's the lead generation or conversion strategy. Then it's remarketing, understanding nobody's ever buying from you on that first demo or that first touch point. And if we understand that process, we can set up the software to tell us which data points would actually matter as being leading lights or KPIs or whatever you want to call it, some kind of an indication that we're on the right track and this effort actually matters and therefore is sustainable over a certain period of time to know that it will eventually help us with revenue. And finally, I think you have to understand that patience is going to be involved too. On anything that is a considered purchase, like is over $100 in value, you're going to have a considered purchase and a longer sales cycle online in the digital world. So you can't do something for a month and then give up on it. You can't even do paid media for a month and then give up on it and say it didn't work for me. That kind of test is always going to be inconclusive and a waste of your time. So don't even bother doing paid media efforts if you don't really know what works reliably and what your process is and what your data points are to measure in terms of here's what I do on the organic traffic driving and what works. Here's what my sales traffic drivers do and what work. And then here are the conversion points that work. And this is how our process goes. And if we hit these numbers, we'll know we're on the right track. If you know all of that, then I think it's safe to get into paid media traffic. All right, with all that said, let's get back to the main topic of this episode, which is organic social media. Today's guest is Kevin Dooley, the co-founder of Kahi Inc. and an active participant in his industry's social media circles. Kahi makes automated asset tracking software that helps restoration contractors track their assets, vehicles, and people as they travel to and from job sites. As you'll soon hear, Kevin isn't afraid to get in the weeds and even stir the pot. How's that working out for him? You'll have to listen to find out.
My name is Kevin Dooley. I'm a co-founder of a company called Kahi Inc. And we're an IoT company focusing in the property restoration disaster space.
Why did you start a platform IoT company in the restoration space?
So my other company, which is an emergency climate control and equipment rental service provider that works with restoration companies across North America, we have a pretty significant fleet of equipment that we need to manage, and it's been a challenge for us. Well, it used to be, and then and frankly, it's a challenge for the entire industry. So originally, we looked at solving a problem for our own needs, and then realized that this is something that we could productize and bring to market. And then from there, it's really expanded into this whole thing, which is more of my moonshot, which is enabling claims transparency. And so there's, long story short, there's a lack of transparency and trust within the property restoration industry between the stakeholders. And so now our mission is to build that trust back, and we think the way to do that is by enabling transparency.
Because insurance companies are able to see when the equipment went out, when the job started.
All of that, plus how the equipment behaves, be able to have the ability to run analytics on the equipment that's deployed to a project, validate all their different service providers across hundreds of thousands of claims, so on and so forth.
And companies who are using Kahi software now, insurance companies are viewing that project a little bit differently than the people who aren't using this tracking that you provide. Is that right?
Yeah, it's early days, truthfully, on that front. But in the conversations that we're having with executives at the various carriers, there's a significant hunger to ensure that the proper amount of equipment is deployed to the job, and therefore the costs are in line with what is actually needed, not in excess or short, so that service providers do a good job and serve their insured.
And so in terms of insurance companies prioritizing Kahi projects and their payouts, I think there's a story there, isn't there?
There absolutely is a story, because what will eventually come is this world where insurance companies will have their preferred vendors, or not even for that matter, any supplier that's having their invoice and their documentation reviewed will be able to have Kahi as one of its underlying technologies that drive operations. And so having the ability to have immutable, accurate data that represents true facts and can justify and prove the actual equipment deployment and the drying strategy that was delivered on a project will just validate all of that. Up until now, it's quasi, or in some cases, like totally subjective in terms of the deployment and what people are doing. And so, in that statement lies the problem. So when there's a flood, as an example, and say you send in 100 different contractors, you're going to get 100 different outputs, and that's kind of strange. It shouldn't be happening.
And you feel like it's much more mathematical, and you can actually standardize it so that the industry is growing up a little bit, in the sense that it's not going to be like the wild, wild west, charge whatever you want. It's going to be like, no, the space was this large. You need this type of equipment to fix it.
It's a very antiquated industry right now. It's slowly getting digitized. There's a lot of interesting things that have kind of been coming into the market from a technology perspective over the last couple of years, but still heavily pen and paper, and specific with drying science and how to dry out a building that just suffered a water damage. The industry is wrought with fraud, and not necessarily malicious fraud in the sense that people are just trying to scam the insurance companies, even though there is some of that. I consider fraud to incompetence. It's a complicated conversation, truthfully, to be fair. But there's high turnover, which is also something that we're looking to address with our technology as well. But there's high turnover, of the staff, so the people that are actually sucking out the water, doing the demolition, the cleanup, that kind of stuff. There's a lot of turnover in that part of the industry, and it's a difficult job, no doubt. And typically, it's not super high paying, which I also want to figure out how to solve. But because of that, high turnover, and it's hard to get these technicians to a point where they understand the science in drying. And then, frankly, from an operations perspective, a lot of restorers have challenges with consistency. One, because of the turnover, and two, frankly, because it's this type of business where you go from, zero, meaning no work, to you got a bit of work, things are nice, it's consistent, nice world to be in, to all out mayhem. Imagine you go into a place like Florida, as an example, where you get smashed by a Category 5 hurricane. You can appreciate, thousands and thousands and thousands of properties that are damaged, and how do you service these people? So
and also that's the challenge of what you wanted to solve, because you're in these condo buildings drying out floors. Where's that piece of equipment that I left? And now you can use Kahi's technology to be able to see where it is exactly in what floor and what the battery life is and how it's performing. Do you want to talk a little bit about the details there?
Yeah, so a typical residential job, 10, couple dozen pieces of equipment, generally speaking. But then you get into these massive projects where there's hundreds, if not thousands, of pieces of equipment. And because pen and paper is the flavor of technology that's predominantly used from a tracking perspective, it's error prone, we'll say. And then frankly, things just get, call it negligence in simple terms. They forget stuff, they lose stuff. And even on these small, your house flooded, sometimes there's an air mover, which is a, $200 to $500 piece of equipment, gets tucked underneath a stairwell that had some water underneath it, and a different technician shows up to pick up the equipment and fails to look there for whatever reason, and boom, there you go, you lost $500 asset. And that's a common story that happens on the regular.
Right on. Okay, so you've had a few companies in your life. What reliably works to increase revenue?
Well, I'm a big believer of marketing through operations. So focusing on the product or focusing on the service, delivering an exceptional quality of product so that people just want to keep using you. And I've always been a big proponent of that. So at least for me, it's training your people, focusing on the smaller details, and just trying to outcompete from that perspective. And then I feel the rest just falls into place.
Are there things that you do that may become easier to you than other people?
Probably.
Do you want to talk about your sales strategies or how you nurture relationships?
Sure. We're a bit of a different, I don't even think we're really a restoration company. I'm a restorer for sure. I wouldn't really call us a restoration company. So most true restoration companies, they market, generally speaking, to the insurance industry, and then other Fortune 500s and commercial clients and things like that. And that's their primary means of bringing in the business. Whereas my business, my previous one and the current one, focused on the restoration contractor themselves. And so back in the day, I realized there was an underserved market in supporting restoration contractors be more successful. And so we started off with just the climate control supplemental equipment for these large complex projects to shore them up when a typical restoration contractor didn't have enough equipment to do the work. And then that kind of expanded into like residential and day-to-day, what we call commodity claims. So like a typical single family home or apartment or something like that experienced a flood or a fire. Often in this industry, there's challenges with capacity, meaning having the people that are capable to go and actually do the work required. And so we expanded our service to provide qualified, trained technicians with like a white label service. So we would work for all the restoration companies, let's say, in a given market in Ottawa. And, one day we're a Service Master, and the next day we're a Paul Davis, and the next day we're a Belfour, which are larger chains that most people would recognize. And so we kind of had that different approach, which was unique in itself. And then just in terms of selling and what have you, frankly, a lot of it is just relationship building, where you pound the pavement and knock on doors and shake hands and lunch and stuff like that. And then the other piece was really just kind of getting involved on LinkedIn for the longest time. And then I realized, a handful of years ago, that a lot of the market was on Facebook still. So I started building up my presence on Facebook as well. And I just get engaged. Back when LinkedIn had the groups, they still do now, but they don't really get used much. Mm-hmm. I used to be involved in groups and just contributing to the conversation and trying to provide valuable insight or life experiences that I've gone through to help kind of just share my thoughts. And I still do that on Facebook, because groups in Facebook are definitely a thing. And I think what's happened over time is people have just recognized my personal brand anyways as somebody that's been around the block. And I don't come from a place of ego or anything, but I try to be helpful, and my mission really is to help contractors succeed.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's actually a business model that is going to consistently be our trend. The days of being a self-serving salesperson are gone, right? Like, nobody's buying from that person anymore. We can sniff it out a little too quickly. But high trust, thinking about how can I help you grow your company, that's going to work.
Yeah, it's like fun. It's funny. We kind of overcomplicate things as humans, generally speaking. And I think that's like 101, right? Sales 101 is like, it's building relationships, building trust, being authentic, trying to like not be too egocentric.
But I think a lot of people don't really know what that looks like. I certainly felt that as a young person when I was starting my company. I didn't know what value meant. I didn't know how to create value. I didn't know how to focus on the other person when I was so focused on my goals. Did you ever feel that way? Like when you're hungry and you're getting at it, like how did you center yourself to be like, actually, I'm going to focus on your business and helping you grow?
I had a lot of good mentors as well. And I don't know, some of this stuff I think just came naturally too. And, I screwed up a lot and learned from that too. And I think it's kind of a combination of all that. I still screw up too. I think obviously we all do. And, but no, I've gone to like leadership seminars and things like that too. Like, Robin Sharma is like somebody that I followed for many, many years, and that was super impactful. And then from that, I met a lot of other interesting kind of like market movers, and like, I don't know, I think it's just kind of something that just happens as you said, like over time, as you amass more, battle scars and war wounds, you hopefully learn from them and be better.
Let's go back to talking about your work on organic social media and what works. Everybody feels like non-boosted organic social media still feels like a golden ticket. Everybody wants it to work for them, but it rarely does. You mentioned that you noticed a trend on LinkedIn groups when they used to be good. They were good, but then a lot of your actual people that you were trying to reach were hanging out more in their groups, Facebook groups, which I think is kind of the reason why people still use Facebook in a lot of ways. How did you make sure that, how did you think about your content? Like, you don't want to be like that angry guy screaming about incompetence. I know that's not you and your vibe. What did you talk about that would be helpful to them? How did you know?
Sometimes I'll start conversations on my own. Often, actually, no, I shouldn't say more than sometimes. I'll be musing on something, and maybe I just want some feedback, and then that sparks a whole kind of series of people that post and kind of chime in. And then other times I'm just kind of waiting for stuff that is interesting, or at least maybe in my wheelhouse, or I see something from a question that somebody's asking me that they're struggling with and I've gone through, and so I'll give my humble view or opinion, for whatever lack of choice of words that you want to put on it. And I try to always be very careful with my words, usually, so it doesn't come across as arrogant or anything, and just try to be like helpful. And I think it's something important that a lot of people, like I've noticed on social media too, they can be quite brash or a little like borderline, or not even borderline, extremely aggressive, or arrogant in how they position. And I think where they use like slang or abbreviations, I try to be very conscious of proper punctuation, proper words that are thought out. I reread my post a couple of times. Sometimes if it's a complicated thing that I want to sit on, and if I type, I'll often cut and then paste my post into a note, and I'll just let it sit there if I really want to decide if I really want to put something out there, because sometimes too, just giving a little bit extra more thought to what you want to share is good. And that's worked really well for me on Facebook, LinkedIn when there was groups. But even people's just wall post on LinkedIn works really well. And I have the benefit of being a B2B, so in the industry you get to know folks and then you network accordingly. If you're B2C, it's a little bit different and the strategy is much different. But as a B2B, if you're going to industry functions and going to networking events and trade shows and things like that, that's where you're going to start to build your Rolodex and start building those people in your social platforms, and then that usually spins off some other randoms that are friends with those people, and then you realize they're in industry, so you connect with them. And that's how I've kind of built it. And it's been basically since LinkedIn never existed, so it's 14-ish years or something probably.
And how do they go from, the things that you're musing on? Starting conversations, I think, is a bit of an art form on social media. I don't think it is something that you can just kind of fly off, like you said, for all the reasons where it can go wrong. Premeditated thought, punctuation. You really want to actually have something that's going to be useful and that's going to encourage people to give their own thoughts onto it so that they can be seen as fellow influencers. Do you think that's been a core strategy, of that you give them a chance to give their own opinion?
Yeah, so when I'm posting stuff and trying to start conversations, sometimes I'll post stuff to be a little bit, I don't want to call it egocentric, but more promoting. A lot of the people in my space like, equipment. Male-dominated industry, so boys like toys, generally speaking. So that there's that element.
Yeah.
And then there's the element of, genuinely, posing perhaps a question that like, either one, you just want to get a sense of where the market's at. So sometimes it's just a kind of a more of a survey-esque type position. And then sometimes maybe you want to stoke the fire a little bit. And sometimes like to be controversial. Sometimes I like to pick on bad actors, because there's a few in my space, which my partner does not like me doing, but I feel it's important. And anyway, we can talk about that maybe.
Well, yeah. I mean, like, how do you know when to stoke the fire and say, actually, this is okay, this is an easy target, or this is not an easy target, but this is an important target, and we need to talk about this? Because that takes a level of bravery, and also a positioning of yourself that you're not going to regret later, which is something that I know you think about.
Yeah, so I'll wade into the water with the sharks. Sometimes I'll throw the blood in to the water and jump in and wait for the sharks to come. I don't do that often. I try to limit it now because I also don't want to be seen as an antagonist. But I think it's important to, have some difficult conversations from time to time. And some of these people I kind of consider somewhat of an adversary, or at least some of them that lack moral integrity in our space. I'll call them out in a way that's general in nature and not specifically calling out individuals or companies. But I'll shine light on situations where, these bad actors are doing something that I just feel is egregious. And I'll try to be thoughtful in how I do that. I try to make it not a dumpster fire. If it does become a dumpster fire, I'll quickly kind of just abandon that one and move on. But if we can start
by deleting it? Like, do you ever delete stuff?
Sometimes, but generally not. And if it gets really bad, then yeah, I will. But I try to mitigate that. But at least I want to try and at least get to a spot where we can actually get some good, meaningful dialogue that's as respectful as it can be. It might get a little contentious. You might get a few people that are a little bit more brash or aggressive, and they're commenting. And sometimes it's fine just to add a little spice to it. But for myself, anyways, I definitely try to be as respectful as possible, but still calling a spade, and it's a fine line. It's a bit of an art and science.
Well, it's something that you want to tackle is fraud in the industry. And if you're seeing, for example, instances of that, I could see how you'd be like, well, we need to talk about this. We need to fix this. This isn't actually a good practice, and it's not where I want to be focusing our efforts for this. I don't want that for our industry.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm a contractor's contractor. I love restoration contractors. I've only worked for restoration contractors for 20 plus years. And so I feel their pain because I live their pain. And they have these gripes and they have these complaints, and they try to bash the insurance companies. And in many instances, they have a legitimate reason, or at least a valid point. Can the insurance companies lack some integrity, or can they do some egregious things? Absolutely. Do I think that's the rule versus an exception? And I think this will probably be controversial if any of my industry hears this, but I think it's a little bit more of an exception. But in certain markets, it's definitely worse than others. There's definitely some legislation that's just ridiculous. But that aside, we kind of did it to ourselves, and it goes back to what we're trying to solve at Kahi. And because there's a lack of transparency, and therefore a lack of trust, you kind of got to empathize with the insurance companies who are ultimately paying the bill in most of these instances. If the product's not consistent every time, why can't restoration companies, I'll probably get flack for this too, but serve a Big Mac? How come we can't consistently serve Big Macs? Now, granted, every situation is a little bit different, but the fundamentals are the fundamentals, and by and large, it should be fairly consistent.
Yeah, because you see it as there's a science to it, and there's a way to get it done.
There is. That's just it. I empathize.
But you're treating your online space like a community.
Absolutely.
And you're nurturing that community. And the things that make good community are being respectful, musing, sharing your thoughts, letting yourself be vulnerable. I think we could bucket that as. Yeah,
be funny, be vulnerable, and maybe you put some stuff out there, even on the video side. So sometimes people, that's something too that I'm kind of considering a lot more now is video. I think with type form, you often can lose a lot of the sincerity and emotion versus video.
Yeah.
And so sometimes when you're trying to make a point or share something, and especially when they could be potentially controversial or what have you, or something that is what I think of a high level of importance, that a message that you want to get out there, sometimes just type form it doesn't cut it. So a short video could be whatever, 20-30 seconds, or it could be a handful of minutes to get the message out there. I think is good, because then they get to see the white in your eyes, they get to see if you have a bit of a smile, whatever the case may be. That facial inspection goes a long way, I think, along with the message, and I think it gives a different kind of reactionary feeling to those that are watching your content too, which resonates on a deeper level. So I think that's some pretty cool stuff.
Yeah. And when you first start a company, do you always turn to organic social media marketing in order to launch it?
I do, but...
do you think you would have if you didn't already have such a strong community there?
Yeah, it's a hard one. But to be honest, if I was just starting, chances are I wouldn't be able to serve on the scale that I have the ability to serve too. So if you're a legit startup with more meager means, as most startups typically are, then I think if it's B2B anyways, and you're serving a local, get out on the street and pound the pavement. Start with that first. And then as you start to scale and be more mature, and then while you're doing that, start building your social, right? Mm-hmm. If you're a thought leader, or at least want to attempt to be one and share some ideas and what have you, great. And then that'll just kind of build in tandem, right? And then as you scale beyond your local geography, then I think that's a different thing.
I think as we grow up, I mean, I felt this. The whole concept of pound the pavement makes so much sense to me. And I'm like, yep, absolutely, you got to do that. But there's so much resistance to do that because, putting yourself out there, building relationships, making new friends, that's not actually that easily done if you're new and you're used to just emailing people, right? Like there's a big push growing up with the internet to just send an email, or you don't even want to get on the phone with somebody. You'd rather rely on that print form. But you're saying that the pound the pavement brings additional value that we just have to accept is really necessary because humans come first.
People are going to buy from people they like and trust, obviously.
And that hasn't changed. Like digital cannot fix that. You have to actually get people to like you first.
Yeah, exactly. It'll augment it. It's kind of, you can post all this amazing stuff. You can do all the right things and you'll influence and probably win some people over. But like, I legitimately think that face-to-face and in-person interaction is the ultimate. And I think the digital side complements it. And then again, depending on the business and the desire to scale and to what level of scale, then that then changes, right? The strategy changes.
Because it can't just be you anymore?
Well, there's that for sure. And then I do think that you can only put yourself out there so much, like you yourself directly with people. And even if you're building a team, great. But I think that's actually another good point to consider too, is like, and I failed at this and I'm trying to fix it now, even to a certain extent, is my brand was more me versus more the company. So there's a fine line too that you need to kind of be cognizant of, especially when you're putting whatever content out into social. You quickly become the brand and not the company. And if you want to really build an asset that's going to appreciate, that somebody else will at some point in time in the future want to buy, hopefully, when you exit, you don't want it to be the Kevin brand or the Alicia brand. You want it to be the brand that some investor or someone else wants to buy and think can keep running on its own merit, not with Alicia or Kevin not there, right?
Yeah. What I like about your saying is that, this concept of pound the pavement, which I initially, early in my career, I was like, nah, I don't want to, right? Like, I just want to send emails. I just want to work from my computer. Going to trade shows and actually getting that social piece of relationship building that you can probably do because you went to school, you can probably do in your life pretty easily. But what you're saying is that you transferred that same knowledge and same awareness of how you behave socially onto social media. And that is a critical factor of your success. Yeah,
that's a good point. So you absolutely need to be the same person on social media as the same person you are in quote unquote real life. Like, don't try to pretend to be somebody you're not on social media, because I think you'll quickly get figured out, and then you've lost all your credibility and frankly your authenticity, right? Like you just need to be your authentic self.
Yeah, and I think that's actually hard. Like, as people are growing up, and if you're a young professional and you haven't quite come into your awareness, that does come with experience and age, that you're like, I know I'm this kind of person, or this is how I want to show up in my spaces. I want to be that person. I do think that there is benefit. Like, now that I'm in my 40s, I'm like, actually, that's a lot. I mean, maybe it came earlier than that, but I feel like that's something that you do have to kind of grow into with life experience, and also maybe bumping your head and having those painful moments.
All of the above. So you don't know what you don't know, and so you shouldn't pretend that you know, because like there's always somebody else that knows more than you, really, and well, almost always. So again, it's just authenticity. Don't try to pretend to be someone you're not, and don't try to pretend like you know everything when you don't. If you're part of a conversation, contribute on what you're certain of and what you've learned and failed from in the past and succeeded from in the past, and just do that.
Yeah. I mean, not that you can't recover. Like, failure is important. You can always recover from failure. And I think it's important to think about failure and to be open to it. Because like, you get a lot of entrepreneurs, I think, who are also, or people who start out who are, they get stuck, right? Like in indecision. It becomes, you don't make any decision because you're so afraid of failure. And that's a bad place to be too. You need to make your mistakes, but then own them.
100%. If you're not failing, you're not trying hard enough, frankly.
We got to grow through the pain. I think those painful moments are teachers.
Absolutely, that's where the gold is. Robin Sharma called it, different seasons. This is more on the personal side of things, but it could apply to business too. And like when you go into these more painful type seasons, don't necessarily rush to get out of them. Most people just want to fix and get out as quick as possible. And yeah, I get it if it's catastrophic and you need to fix stuff, of course. But if you're feeling some larger stress, but it's not catastrophic in nature, sometimes it's good to just kind of sit in it and marinate it for a moment or two and kind of figure out why legitimately, why is it happening? And, see what part of it, that you can legitimately own, and maybe you own all of it, who knows? But like, you have to fail. Like, simple as that.
You got to put yourself out there, and you got to allow yourself to learn from those moments so that you can grow. I mean, if you hadn't lost equipment, you probably wouldn't have started Kahi.
Exactly.
Is there anything else we should have covered today that we didn't get into?
Happy to chat whatever you want.
Actually, I would do one final question for you. In that space of going from I'm starting a conversation, I want feedback on something, I'm putting myself out there, I'm being respectful. I know that you went from this sort of like, not soft sell, but here I am as a person on social media, to actually booking demos. And that's a pretty hard leap. It's a leap that people try to take too quickly by being self-promotional. You said that you're self-promotional with caution and you don't do it very often. But I know that most of your demos get booked through the things that you're doing on social media and the name that you've built for yourself in the community from building relationships that started offline. I get that. But how did you make the transition to say, if you want to meet with me, book time on my calendar to discuss Kahi?
I asked them.
And you said, would this be okay?
No, so like, as part of sales, as any good salesperson would know, is you have to ask for the sale, of course. So when I'm engaging, on social or whatever, and I'm trying not to be too self-promoting. Sometimes we are absolutely self-promoting, and if somebody wants to learn more, they're typically going to say something, or they'll DM me or whatever the case may be, and great. And then you just ask for the sale and say, okay, well, this is our process, and book a demo, and here you go. Other times, someone else is talking about something that's, basically Kahi solves that particular situation, and I'll just chime in. Sometimes I'll give some insight, and sometimes I'll say, hey, if you want to have a conversation about this is what we're doing over here.
And not be too timid about it. Let yourself fail on it.
You have to. Like I said, if you're not failing, then you're not trying hard enough.
So in order to get to this dream of I'm going to use all the free tools I can in order to make the most revenue and become as profitable as possible with the fewest expenses, you have to lay down your process first. You have to lay down your tracking, and that includes your conversion points, so that you know what you can optimize. If you separate out the efforts of those 3 different growth strategies, or those growth levers of here's what we're doing to increase awareness, i.e. traffic, here's what we're doing to get lead generation, i.e. conversions, and how we can optimize each of those places, you also have to think about how you're going to nurture them, because they're not going to buy on the first point, particularly with a considered purchase and a longer sales cycle. You've got that process laid out and those 3 traffic drivers separated by effort, then you can put down meaningful tracking with software. You can't do all of those things at once. I think you have to have different phases to calculate each. And part of that optimization is not just, hey, we want tons of volume leads. It's not just about quantity. You need to make sure that you're getting your sales team quality leads. And a quality lead is somebody who's likely to become a customer. It doesn't have to be right away. Over time, with a strategy to make sure that they come back to us and that they think about us, that'll totally work. But you have to calculate for time and your expenses as well, of course. So you've got all of this laid down, and then I think you could easily have an existential crisis about what it is that you should be doing in your social media messages. And I think that purpose is really critical too. So going back to here's our process, here's how we're going to track it, and now we need to think about our purpose and what it is that we expect social media to do for us. And here's where I'd break down social media efforts into new meaningful buckets. A traffic effort for social media is totally merited and worthwhile, but it will only work if you have a link back to a website or a landing page for them. Otherwise, it's not going to count as traffic. The other metric you can look at is the engagement. Now, of course, engagement metrics on most social medias now really matter in terms of who's watching, because that is the size of your potential audience. So sometimes people refer to likes and hearts of social media messages as vanity metrics that don't really matter, but actually they probably do matter because they do constitute how large your audience can be. And the more people who like something, the larger the audience will grow with the algorithms and the way that they are presently set up. So you kind of want to have a mix of fun stuff that allows your audience to be large, but also having links back to your website. I'm kind of an advocate for always being fun to increase your size, but always having a link, because every effort should be a traffic effort if you're doing organic social media marketing. Okay, that's contentious. You can argue with me about it later. But ultimately, the purpose must overhang you in terms of creating a brand and what it is that you stand by, and the integrity of that brand and the topics that you talk about are critical here. So just remember that a social media post is always going to be a traffic driver effort and an awareness effort, which is the same thing. And the chaos that you can get into in terms of time is wasting time by not knowing what your process is and what you're doing on those posts and what data points it should serve for knowing that you are on the path of attracting more people to your company so more people can become more customers and you can increase your revenue. After you have all of that set up in terms of process, tracking, and purpose, I think you need to use some manufacturing principles of production. And that is to have a very clean production of how you will create these posts, who will post them, and who will then later on analyze them to make sure that they are meeting the metrics that you set for each stage of the process. So I don't think you're ever going to get a quick and dirty path to success with organic social media, but as long as you know exactly why it is helping you and what role it plays, it's an important part of your long-term strategy for success as a brand.
Find more episodes of the Company Growth Podcast on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you've got a company growth story you'd like to share, reach out to Tangible Words. We'd love to hear your story and use it to inspire others to beat their own company growing pains. Until next time, thank you for listening to the Company Growth Podcast.